Hello, dear students of Masters. Hopefully, you are doing great. Today, we are supposed to discuss the state and condition of the women in England in the Elizabethan period. So, now let's start. The condition of women in Shakespeare's time. In discussing the imaginary Judith Shakespeare, Woolf examines the circumstances common to women's lives during the Renaissance. For example, women had little or no say in their future. They were expected to marry as soon as possible, even as young as 13 or 14 years of age, and begin raising a family of their own. Woolf points out the history books do not mention women very often, and when they do, it is usually to relate that wife beating was common and generally approved of in all classes of society. Woolf says that even in the 19th century, a woman was not encouraged to be an artist. On the contrary, she was snubbed, slapped, lectured, and exhorted. Her mind must have been strained and her vitality lowered by the need of opposing this, of disproving that. Para 14. Here, Virginia Woolf has spoken about the physical and mental torture that inflicted the women folk of the Renaissance period, and those ill treatment lowered down their intellectual faculty or their confidence level. In the non-fiction prose, A Room of One's Own, Woolf speaks about Shakespeare's imaginary sister. Woolf creates a character who was supposed to be Shakespeare's sister, who she names Judith Shakespeare. In Shakespeare's time, women could not be actors, composers, writers, etc. Therefore, Judith may have instead gotten pregnant out of wedlock to an actor and committed suicide, because she would have found no outlets for her creative genius. Here, our writer tries to points out that if Shakespeare had an imaginary sister and she was a prodigy like Shakespeare, and she could not get the scope to vent her own genius, and she would have married to an actor, and she would be pregnant, and she would have got no scope to flourish or expose her own faculty. In that case, she would have committed suicide. Now have a look on the women's position and their marriage. Women's position did not change even during the next 200 years. Still, the women of the upper and middle class were not allowed to choose their own husbands. Instead, their parents decided whom they would get married. Another point is, marriage was an affair of family avarice, particularly in the chivalrous upper classes. That means the marriages took place not on the basis of likings or love affairs or something like that. Rather, their prime concern was the worldly things or the sublunary activities, and their main concern or prime concern was the wealth and their class they were much conscious about their class distinctions, and most often that their the aim of their marriage was directed to avarice, especially in the chivalrous upper classes. Another vital point is law and custom made the husband lord and master. As women could write very little or even didn't write something or spell something, they didn't get much education, they were not taught trade, so they became the subservient to men in their husband's house. They were subdued or they were dominated by their husbands. So law and custom, these were also in favor of the husband, and the husband was the chief actor in the family, whereas women had hardly any space to speak or to do something of their own. Whereas in fiction, some of the most profound thoughts come from her lips, from her thoughts. But in reality, she could hardly read and spell words. In Shakespeare's time, we find there are so many women characters. They are full of intelligence and they are bright and they are witty. But in reality, those were only in the fiction. So from these points we can understand that the women actually were leading a miserable life. They were devoid of education, proper education. They were devoid of trade and commerce. So they were not able to earn their own, and that's why they had not right to make the decision. They were completely dependent on their male counterparts. And Virginia Woolf wanted to set women free, and he poses so many questions. What are the reasons that kept women aloof and that made the women folk subservient? And she advocates in favor of women. If the women got sufficient scope, they would have flourished and they could have written immortal writings like Shakespeare. So that's all today. Thank you very much. Wish you all the best. Thank you.